Okay? So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Sometimes silence speaks better than words. But this time I am compelled to break my silence and resort to words in order to describe all the gratitude I have for being in this cultural studies master program. Indeed, I have only been surrounded by amazing and knowledgeable professors, to whom I owe to that this insightful training that I spent during the 2 years in this master program. They all helped me in one way or another to build my personality in meeting different cultures with different people and different ways of thinking, of course. Thus, I was able to develop a critical thinking through various subjects that are illustrated with an in-depth analysis and classroom discussions, not to mention the regular meetings we hold with Americans and foreigners in general. I begin my thanks by naming Professor Khalid Zakawi, who gave us his tough love, which is the result of our today's success. A special thanks goes to Professor Kabir Sandi, who is not only my supervisor today, but also my undergrad professor. Professor Sandi was always there to devote time to discuss my paper and give suggestions and critiques if needed. Another no less important figure to mention is Professor Sadiq Rada. Sir, I thank you so much for accepting to be the second reader of my paper and for your prompt answer to my request to have this defense. I also would like to thank Professor Kayati, Professor Bendis, Professor Zakhan, and Professor Moyi. I also thank all the people who are here today, and I would like to say to the sub-Saharan people who are here, merci d'être venu m'encourager aujourd'hui. Now I'm going to move on to present my paper. In a time when equality before the law was almost a dream, the Negro is subject to assimilation, alienation, acculturation, not to mention the colonial occupation of Africa. Nos ancêtres, les Gaulois, they would teach them at school. The 1920s was a remarkable date in the history of the Negro in general, because it occasioned the Harlem Renaissance struggle in America for more equal rights and treatments, and a self-consciousness of the Negro in France. Facing such a social prejudice on the one hand within France and the colonial occupation in Africa on the other, the black elites could not remain indifferent to what matters for them. That's why they met, they wrote, they sang, danced, and ultimately came up with a greater idea which is best known today as le mouvement de la Negritude, the Negritude movement. As a case in point, as a starting point, Negritude is a literary movement that emerged in the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s that began among the French-speaking African and Caribbean writers living in Paris. Negritude is a protest against French colonial rule in Africa and the policy of assimilation in France. The most well-known figures today are Léopold Sédar Senghor, the first president of the Democratic Republic of Senegal in 1960, and along with Aimé Césaire from the Martinique and Léon Gontran Damas from the French Guiana. Before going any further, let us devote a little time to the Harlem Renaissance. In fact, the latter movement could be said to have a big influence to Césaire, Senghor, and Damas movement. The Harlem Renaissance is a literary movement, and it is a literary and artistic flowering movement that emerged among a group of black thinkers and artists, including novelists and poets, in New York City in 1920. The Harlem Renaissance militant were determined to bring to an end the bad treatment and lack of freedom of expression inflicted to the black communities in a hostile American society. L'étudiant noir appeared to be the first achievement of the Negritude movement that enabled these young black Africans to answer back the white assimilation and the colonial enterprise on the one hand, and the daily bad hard treatment Africans encounter in France on the other. Creating a journal within the colonial era that went against the mainstream or the status quo was not an easy task to do, because such a practice was seen by the colonizer as aberrant attitudes. As a proof, L'étudiant Noir was not welcomed by the French ruling class because it was seen as an act of rebellion and protest for the African community in France. With no doubt, the French government policy reacted to it to bring the fight to an end. However, saying that L'étudiant Noir was the first achievement of the Negritude movement does not comprise or belittle in either way the female contribution to the movement. In fact, the female contribution to the rise of the movement was one of my focuses in the dissertation. That is, I tried to rehabilitate their memories. Incidentally, these female characters drew some attention of some writers today. As a case in point, in Washington, D.C., the systematic dissertation wrote a historical account entitled Gendering Negritude, Paulette Nabal's contribution to the birth of modern Francophone literature by Sharon Lewis, to recollect accounts of these unheard stories. In the beginning of her account,